Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Patti Peeples, the president of the Peeples Collaborative, and welcome to the next episode of Patti's People, sponsored by Bacaris and the Evidence Base. Today, we welcome Emily Reuben, the CEO and co-founder of Duchenne UK, where she leads a lean and ambitious charity to end Duchenne's muscular dystrophy through advocacy, research, and resource sharing among families affected by this disease. Her organization has played a significant role in funding critical research, uncovered disease and treatment pathways and stages that have improved the management of DMD, and she and her organization have been recognized with numerous awards for their contribution. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me, Patti. I'm really looking forward to this.
I am too, and I'm delighted that you're going to spend some time with us today talking to us about what your calling is in this disease state and how you have formed such a powerful and impactful patient advocacy organization. And we're going to talk not only about your specific work in this disease state, but also my hope is that you'll share with me and our listeners how you have managed to play such a notable role in patient advocacy with NICE, the National Health Service, and provider organizations and research organizations, and hopefully some lessons learned through your experience can be imparted to our listeners as they pursue this patient advocacy area in their own disease states of interest.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to quite live up to that billing, Patti, but I'm happy to help however I can.
Well, I think if any of the prior interviews that I've watched with you are an indication, I'm pretty certain that you will not only live up to, but exceed that. Well, why don't we begin with us talking a little bit about the genesis of your involvement in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy and why you have such a calling in this area and how you moved from a patient to patient advocacy.
Well, my background isn't medical or scientific at all. I was actually a correspondent and presenter for Channel 4 News in the UK and then CNN International. And then overnight, I went from covering other people's tragedies to being at the center of my own because my firstborn child, my son Eli, aged 3.5, was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And that diagnosis completely floored my husband and I. And for about a year, we were just left trying to survive. We had another daughter at the time, Lauren, and we've now got a third, Marnie. And it took me a while to actually pluck up the courage to think that I could fight this and do something to move the needle. And I did. I set up Duchenne Children's Trust, and then I met this incredible mother called Alex Johnson, whose son had also just been diagnosed with Duchenne. And we came together and formed Duchenne UK. So we've been going about 13 years. And it's been a really steep learning curve because, my background wasn't in this space at all. But actually, I think being ignorant of the obstacles is somehow liberating, because if you don't know what stands in your way, you just kind of get on with it. And people either get on board or get out the way. And we've sort of built a real momentum now in the UK because there was an incredible infrastructure here of key opinion leaders, doctors, nurses, physiotherapists who were really trying to help with Duchenne. They lacked resources, and we've tried to really help boost that infrastructure within the UK, as well as looking globally, because this is a rare disease. And you ask what motivates me, clearly it's my son. I mean, it turns out with Duchenne, it's a very complex disease and you can't just end up saving one child. So we're now trying to save an entire population. But he is what motivates me.
Was there a particular thing, challenge, hurdle that moved you from a parent struggling with this disease at your family unit level that then moved you to approach this in a more holistic and bigger geographic focus?
Well, that's a really good question, because actually there was a moment, and we set up the charity with a view to only research, because that research would lead to treatments and we'd be home dry. That was the naive Emily talking. But then I was trying to get my son onto a clinical trial. And my co-founder, Alex, was also trying to get her son, Jack, on a clinical trial. But we were both turned away because there weren't enough spaces. Now, that wasn't because the doctors didn't want to run the trials. It's because there were only 2 centers running clinical trials and they only had very, very limited capacity. So we decided that in order to address this, we would have to set up a network of clinical trial sites. And we did that. We invested £4 million and we went in a space of 5 years from having 2 sites doing clinical trials to having 11. And we now have more boys on clinical trials than ever before. And I really do believe that if we hadn't set that up, it would be really challenging right now to run clinical trials in the UK, especially because of the double hit of Brexit and COVID, and the pressures that both of those events have put upon on NHS England. So we really had a profound impact on creating an infrastructure for running research in the UK. And not only that, but we were also very patient focused about how is this going to help the patient? So we wanted to spread the word and educate patients about clinical trials in the UK. And clinicaltrials.gov is the main sort of place for people to go to, but it's quite unuser friendly. And it can be overwhelming because it's trials around the world. So we developed our own DMD Hub website and our own clinical trial finder, which has a very beautifully curated list of every single trial that's happening in the UK. It has a downloadable PDF which explains in lay terms what the trial involves and what the mechanism of action of the investigational product is. And the clinical trial finder has really been a game changer because parents now could just go online, find out what trials are happening where in the UK and reach out to those sites via the trial finder. So that was the first time where we translated our lived experience as patients into something that was a sort of game changer within the ecosystem of research and development in the UK.
I mean, that is just mind-blowing. You know, there's probably not a single family that suffers from a critical disease that has not sat around their kitchen table and said, if only there was a treatment that worked, or there is a clinical trial, if only I knew how to get into it, or I could turn that no, you don't qualify, into a yes. How does a mother that comes out of television even move to that next step? And what process did you set up that is then could be a template for other disease states? So dig into that process for us.
Well, I mean, the DMD Hub is a template for anything. And actually, the government published a paper a couple of years ago about how to increase clinical trial capacity and make the UK, you know, a central focus for research globally. And one of the things they suggested was setting up exactly what we've done. So we've proven that it can work. And I think one of the key things that Alex and I did from the very beginning was really surround ourselves with the experts and work with the experts. You know, there was already a sort of infrastructure of care, not of care, but of clinical sites within the UK. And we really did our best to try and work with the key opinion leaders to make sure that the decisions we were making were in the interest of everybody, because, you know, clinicians need to buy into what you're doing to deliver the service, and patients need to understand what you're doing so that they can take part in it. So you really have to have a very collaborative approach. I mean, the DMD Hub was really me responding as a mother to the situation that I saw as being detrimental to my son, i.e. him not being able to access a clinical trial. But there's another program that we set up called Project Hercules, which I know you want to focus on, Patti. And that was really about, and that was actually a step change in my understanding of the complexity of drug development, because, you know, getting your child on a clinical trial and making sure there are enough places for them to do it is pretty simple. Trying to understand how governments pay for new medicines is an entirely different
horse of a different color.
Yeah. And in that instance, I was very lucky with the people I met who gave me the idea to do it.
Well, you've mentioned Project Hercules, and I really want to delve into that in more detail. So let's just jump into that right now. What is Project Hercules? What was your intent what was the need, the unmet need? How is Project Hercules filling that need, and what do we need to understand about it from a learning healthcare system approach?
So Project Hercules is a really, really unique collaboration. It had never been done before. And what it essentially is a collaboration between Duchenne UK, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and academics to build the best disease evidence for reimbursement decisions and health technology assessment. So the way, as you know, drug development happens, you have to climb the first mountain, which is proving your drug is safe and effective. Then you have to climb another mountain, which is proving that it offers value. And often these small biotechs who are in this space, they've climbed the first mountain and all of a sudden they've got to climb the second mountain, and it's overwhelming because the granularity of evidence, what you need, is really, tricky stuff to develop. We've been running the charity for a couple of years, and I met a woman called Fleur Chandler, who was actually running health outcomes for respiratory disease at GSK at the time. Her son also had Duchenne, Dom. So she had the head of a health economist and the heart of a Duchenne mother. And at that time, there was a drug going through NICE, which is the National Institute of Clinical Excellence in the UK. There was a drug going through NICE for a subsection of kids with Duchenne. It had been given conditional marketing authorization by the EMA, and it was going through NICE. And it took NICE 2.5 years to make a decision about this drug. And even though my son couldn't benefit from that treatment, I realized the devastating impact of having a delay like that.
Yeah.
Because the label on the drug said you could have it when you're walking from age 5 until you lose ambulation. So there were parents in the UK who were celebrating when this drug was approved, only to see their children stop walking and then not being able to access the drug. And I realized in that moment that there is something worse than having no approved treatment for your disease. And that is having a treatment that's been approved as safe and potentially effective, but you can't access it because no one's worked out how to pay for it.
Right.
And this just felt very, very wrong to me. So Fleur came to me and said, listen, one of the reasons the company is struggling is because there's such thin evidence about Duchenne. What if we got everyone together and built the evidence base together to really give these companies the best chance of getting through HTA? So we did it, and we brought in Josie Godfrey to be the strategic director, who used to work at NICE, and she actually set up the rare disease pathway for medicines, the highly specialized technologies appraisal system. So she was very well placed to help us develop Project Hercules. And it's a multi-million-pound project, and it started very much as a sort of leap of faith, really. So we got the companies together, the original companies, and we had a workshop about what do we need to do. And we realized that we needed to really delve into the natural history model of Duchenne to really understand the granularity. We needed to build together an economic model, and we needed to review the quality of life instruments to see which were applicable for Duchenne. I remember looking at one of them, the EQ5D, it's 7-item questionnaire, and just thinking, this doesn't speak to me at all. Because where I'm feeling now about Eli is very different to where I was feeling 6 months ago. And it doesn't take into account any of the psychosocial burden or any, of the additional burdens that come along with a progressive pediatric disease. So we did a review of EQ5D, and we worked with the School of Health-Related Outcomes at Sheffield University. And we found, no surprise, that EQ5D wasn't fit for purpose. So we developed our own quality of life metric. Now, I didn't even realize at the time what a big deal this was, because we ended up interviewing over 300 patients. It was a 2-year project. It was massively iterative. So we did surveys with patients. We went back and spoke to them. We did focus groups. We did workshops. And together we came up with a 14-item questionnaire that's now called the DMD Qual and is being licensed by Oxford University Innovations. But the key thing about it is that no one company could have done that on their own, because it requires time, investment, money, and most importantly, the goodwill of the patient community. And that's what we at Duchenne UK have, because patients understand what we're doing is for the benefit of everybody.
Let me just jump in and ask this question. So you had multiple pharmaceutical companies, correct? As well as Sheffield University, and then your patient group.
Mm.
Then you reached out to a broader group of patients. Were each of the pharmaceutical companies and the academics, were each of them putting some money in, or were you funding all of this through your charity?
The pharma companies were funding it, and
Okay.
we're paying the academics to do the work. So we basically, when we started Project Hercules, we had a list of things we wanted to do, and we worked out what the budget would be, and then we had a sort of workshop with all the companies working in Duchenne and said, this is what we're planning on doing. Would you like to join us? And they did, and massive credit to them, because it had never been done before. And we were asking them to work with competitors,
Yes.
be it in a non-competitive space, but and we had Pfizer signed up, Roche are now members, and then we had a number of smaller companies who are sort of focused solely on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So they funded it, and it really was a leap of faith for them. Having said that, Duchenne UK has invested its own money in terms of paying for some of the running costs of the project. And actually, we invested in Josie and in some of the pre-work before we had any guarantees of getting the money in from pharma. Because at that point, once I'd realized what needed to change, I was very, very committed. And I said to Josie and Fleur, listen, we've got to make this happen no matter what. But actually, we need pharma because we need their expertise. And actually, we have really constructive steering group meetings where everybody talks in a non-competitive space about the challenges of gathering evidence in Duchenne. We're really benefiting from a huge amount of expertise on the steering group for Project Hercules.
And now Project Hercules has been running for how long?
6 years.
Okay. And what has been the trajectory of focus? I assume you've got some longitudinal data that you utilize from Project Hercules, or what's the current and the future of it?
Right. Well, we didn't collect data ourselves. What we did was look around for data to inform some of the things we were doing. So we needed longitudinal natural history data to be able to populate that. And that's where we worked with other global patient advocacy groups who've been really helpful. So PPMD in the US helped to fund Synergy, which is a natural data set of Duchenne patients in the US. And they were unbelievably helpful, and the D-Risk Consortium. So they helped us to access that data set. And so that really formed the bulk of the data for the natural history model, which then fed into the economic model. And so but as well as using that natural history data, in order to build the natural history model, we really wanted to reflect the patient experience. So what happens in Duchenne is patients tend to go to clinic once every 6 months. And you can be in one particular disease state for less or more than 6 months. So historically, Duchenne was characterized into 4 disease stages: early ambulant, late ambulant, early non-ambulatory, late non-ambulatory. But we felt as patients that was missing something. Something was missing there, because actually what happens is that boys go through what we've now called a transfer state. And this is a really important state because it's about weight bearing. And if you can weight bear, you can transfer independently. You can toilet independently. You can get dressed independently. If you cannot weight bear, you cannot do any of those things. And all of a sudden, you go from being independent to needing 24-hour care. And the cost implications of that are huge. But this state had never been picked up in clinical visits, because it could last 3 months. It could last 6 months. Even if parents were in it, they wouldn't know how to articulate it, because there was no method of capturing it in the questionnaire in the clinic. And if they'd just gone through it, they were too traumatized to think about it. So, it was being missed, it was being lost. And actually, it's a key stage, because that's when, you need more care, you need more help, and the cost burden and the burden of illness massively increases. So we identified that not only by looking at the natural history data, because it wasn't in there, but by, again, talking to patients. So we held workshops, we had a Delphi panel, we spoke to patients, and we identified this stage. And I think it's critical, because I think not only will it be useful for health technology assessment, but also in understanding disease trajectory. And if you're developing a drug and you can keep a patient in that transfer stage, that's really significant. Even if they're not walking, they're still in the transfer state.
Yeah.
And that's hugely beneficial for the patient and for the caregiver. And now we've identified it, we can populate it and look at it, and it can be another argument for, the efficacy of a drug and the impact of its benefit on quality of life.
And so how did you engage directly with NICE and NHS with this information that's coming out of Project Hercules?
Well, NICE have been really engaged, and we've always had a representative from NICE on the steering group meeting, on the steering group. And then when NICE, they have an annual conference, and I think it was 2019, where I gave the keynote address talking about Project Hercules, and how this could represent a paradigm shift for all diseases. Because imagine if every disease had its own economic model, its own natural history model that NICE agreed on. Committee discussions would then end up not focusing on the veracity of the model or the veracity of the natural history, but looking at the actual data pertaining to that product. So I really think Project Hercules offers a way forward in the future to simplify and speed up reimbursement decisions and discussions. So NICE have been really on board, and actually we saw a product go through NICE this year for Duchenne, and they praised Duchenne UK for the incredible work of Project Hercules and how they'd never seen anything quite like it, and that we were to be congratulated for what we'd achieved. That was a really incredible moment for us.
So I have heard you say in other interviews that you struggle a little bit with NICE's standards for rare diseases in general, that you feel that they're a bit too high. Tell me a little more about this, and how are you addressing this? Because you've had success in working with NICE. How are you going to take this bull by the horns, so to speak?
Well, sometimes I think about that serenity prayer and have the power to know what you can change and what you can't, and know the difference. I mean, we input a lot into NICE when they put out public appraisals, and obviously we work closely with members at NICE on various things. But one of the challenges I think we're going to come up against is that the criteria for what counts as a rare disease changed, and so Duchenne now no longer qualifies as a rare disease. So instead of going down the highly specialized technologies appraisals route, which is what we historically did, we now go down standard technology appraisal. And this is challenging because assessing a general common disease is very different to assessing a rare disease. And I really do worry that we're ever going to be able to prove value if we're measured against drugs that are for the general population, which are for common diseases. And the quality threshold is just so, it's not going to make economic sense to fund a rare disease drug through standard technology assessment. And that's my worry. And it's not just because it's a rare disease, it's because of the nature of Duchenne. It's because it's a pediatric progressive disease. The baseline is always changing. You have very small patient population numbers. There's a huge amount of variability in phenotype. So you're often not going to get, your clinical trial data is going to be difficult to interpret, and there's going to be anomalies, and there's going to be challenges in the data sets, and you're not going to have the longitudinal data that you would like. You're not going to have the big numbers. So I think this is a challenge that is ongoing, and current drugs in the Duchenne pipeline are going through standard technology assessment. We'll have to see how they play out. But I do worry for the very, very high cost drugs like gene therapy. I think going through standard technology appraisals, that's it's going to be very, very challenging for them.
So from a policy standpoint, in a way, you took those 4 categories on the disease progressiveness of Duchenne's, and you said, look, there's more than 4. There's this transitional stage. Are you thinking the same thing about rare diseases versus standard diseases, that we need more discreteness with what pathways we put drugs through and how they're evaluated, that things can't fit into these binary groups?
we definitely need that, Patty. We need this old phrase, regulatory flexibility, but we need it. And the frustrating thing in the UK is that we have it through highly specialized technologies appraisals. It's just that Duchenne no longer qualifies because you have to be really, really rare to qualify for that. So maybe we need a third way. But NICE has a new chief executive. They're very open to engaging and listening and speaking to the patient. But I do worry that even with everything we've done with Project Hercules, NICE have said, we need this. And we've said, okay, we've given you the very best version of what you need. Even with that, I'm still not sure these products are going to get through. And then we have to reassess because then the system has to change.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons that you learned with Project Hercules. If we have another patient advocacy group that's in a disease state that's grappling with the same challenges you did, the way that the patients are treated and managed is not sufficient, it's not reflective of real life, and they are at the beginnings of forming their patient advocacy, what are 3, 4, 5 tips you would give them of how you started this natural treatment approach? What did you learn? What do you think you would have done differently now after you've been through the process? What can you tell others about climbing this mountain?
Okay. Well, I thought the first thing I would say is be really ambitious. Because as I said before, one company can't do this alone. Be ambitious and be bold and know your power. Because the patient advocates are the sort of honest broker in this ecosystem. All we want are treatments that are effective and a regulatory system that's flexible enough to be enabled for us to access them. That's what we want. And, that power goes a long way. So I would say be ambitious. The second thing I would say is surround yourself with the very best people, because, health technology assessment and health economists, they speak in a very difficult language to understand. So you really you can't do this on your own. You need experts. And I could not have done this without Josie Godfrey and without Fleur Chandler, because a lot of times in the beginning, I didn't understand what people were talking about. I knew what needed to change and I could see what was happening from the lay perspective. But, you're talking about very highly specialized research and academic work. So really surround yourself with the best people. And then I would say really reach out to pharma and get them on board as partners, because they can bring a lot of value. I mean, yes, they help to fund the work, but they bring value in other ways too. So really don't be afraid to do that. And then I would also say, beware of contracting with pharma, because it can take a long time. And that's what held us back in the early days, was contract. And it was painful. And we were very lucky that we had pro bono support from CMS, a big law firm in London, because the legal fees would have probably been prohibitive had we not had that. So those are the 3 things I would say. Be ambitious, surround yourself with the best people, and get really good legal advice, because contracting can drag you down. And you don't want that. You don't want it to do that. I mean, I think the good news is that there was no pathway. There was no roadmap for doing this before we did it. And now that we've done it, and we've had feedback from people like NICE saying that it works and it's great, everyone should be doing it. So we do at least now have a roadmap. So hopefully people wouldn't, come up against those obstacles that we did.
Is Project Hercules discrete to the UK, or is it in multiple countries or worldwide?
The outputs of Project Hercules can be used in any jurisdiction that uses health technology assessment. So many countries around the world have the equivalent of NICE, in Australia, in Japan, many countries in Europe, and some states now in the US, and some insurance companies are actually looking at health technology assessment. So as a way of, looking at price and value. So any system that uses HTA can use the outputs. Any company can use the outputs of Hercules to take to that system.
Have you noticed a change in NICE over the 13 years that you've worked with them? And if so, what has changed?
That's a good question. I mean, I didn't really work with NICE in the early days because I was so in my silo of funding research
Mhm,
and getting research to pay to patients. And I naively thought, look, my son's got Duchenne, he's dying. Of course, NICE are going to pay for these drugs.
mhm,
And then we had the situation with Translana where it took 2.5 years to make a decision. And that's when I started to think, oh, there could be a problem here.
mhm,
Um, I think NICE is very open to discussions with the patient community, and they're doing a lot now to try and educate patient groups about what happens when a company submits to NICE, what
mhm,
the various stages are, what a scoping consultation is, what the various committees do. But to
mhm.
be honest, I feel like it's very difficult for a patient organization to get to grips with what happens at NICE. It's
Mhm,
so complex.
mhm,
Never mind the language they use, but the various
mhm,
stages, the various committees,
mhm.
the role of a patient advocate on a NICE committee meeting. I think it's really challenging, and I struggle to some degree with putting the onus on the patient groups to have to learn how NICE
Yeah,
operates. And this
because
isn't
they
criticism,
use
this is the system, Patty, because often, there are many patient organizations who are just, small organizations run by parents who are distraught by living with a child who has, a disease, and it's enough
Mhm,
to get out of bed every day, never mind having to educate yourself about how these complex organizations work,
mhm,
which is why we need more than ever Project Hercules for every disease area, because you need to embed that patient experience in the evidence that's being presented to NICE
mhm.
so that the burden doesn't just fall on the individual patient.
Yeah. I mean, that's another significant unmet need is the training pathway for other patient advocacy organizations, because as you say, they tend to be started by parents at their lowest point in life that with the most critical thing they've ever experienced. So how can you expect them to have the bandwidth and the expertise and all of the things you need to create something from scratch? NICE is opening their process more and more to patients, and they're doing this through the joint clinical assessment with HTA looking at numerous other countries. Uh, have you actually sat on decision-making committees at the HTA level, or what is your organization's role in that, or what do you see could be your role in the future?
Well, we'd love to be involved, because obviously no one knows more about the disease than the patient.
Hmm.
Um, and if you have that patient perspective with clinical trial data that's robust, I think that's really powerful. And it would. And I think having a patient voice at decision-making level is important. I have been involved as the MHRA has run a scheme called ILAP, the Innovative Licensing Adaptive Pathway, and I helped to advise on that. I think NICE are doing more to include patients, but I think we're still facing the same challenge, which is patients trying to get their head around the opaque language of NICE and the processes that are used and how we actually, make an impact there,
Hmm.
meaningful impact.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm just not sure what the answer is yet.
Yeah. So we, hear a lot of the terms patient centricity, et cetera. I would bet that you probably roll your eyes a little bit at that. What are we missing in with some of the stakeholders when we talk about patient centricity? And what do you wish that really meant?
Oh, that's such a good question. The patient voice, it's always added as an afterthought, I feel. Although
Mhm,
it's getting better. I think it is getting better, in fairness. And um, I think there's two things about it. I think the first thing is that and I really realized this when we were going on the journey with Project Hercules, is that in the committee meetings, they have key opinion leaders, they have patient experts, and then they have the company, and then they're asked questions. My worry about putting a patient in that situation is that in order to survive the daily horrors and onslaught of living with a child with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and they are daily,
Mm-hmm.
you have to minimize it in your mind and in your heart. You have to
Mm-hmm.
make it not big. You have to
Mm-hmm.
steel yourself
Mm-hmm.
against every loss of function, against every crying meltdown. It's brutal.
Mm-hmm.
But so when you diminish it in your mind, you then diminish it to other people in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So when you then appear on a steering group committee meeting, how are you expected to really describe that experience? So here's an example. So when we started doing Project Hercules, we were looking at the burden on the patient and their family. And Josie said to me, how many times do you go to hospital, a year? And I was like, 3 or 4 times. And then I actually went down over my diary, and it was 13 visits that year alone. So you see, in order to survive, I diminished the impact. I wasn't able to fully articulate the impact, just the practical impact of Duchenne on my son and my family's life. So I think when we're talking about the patient voice, we need to think of ways of being sophisticated in including that patient voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the transfer stage in Project Hercules is an ideal example of that, because what we did was we listened to the patient describing the disease, and in listening to them, we broadened our understanding and we deepened our understanding of the disease. And that is now embedded in the natural history model in Project Hercules, in the economic model. Companies understand it so that they can build their evidence with that in mind. So the patient doesn't then have to go to NICE and explain about this transfer state and, oh, no one knows what that means and what does that mean. We're embedding the patient voice within the data and within the evidence. And I think that is absolutely critical for me, is taking the burden off the patient by doing a one-time deep dive, which is what we did with Project Hercules, a one-time deep dive into the experience, and then incorporating that into the evidence. Another example of that is the burden on caregiver. And I really want NICE and other bodies to probably recognize the impact on the caregiver when coming to decisions about reimbursement, because I can't overstate enough the impact. I mean, it's truly devastating. And we're about to publish a paper on this. And the academics who came, we did a big focus group on it. And we didn't just restrict it to Duchenne. We invited, because I think this is true of parents of all pediatric progressive diseases. There's something about a progressive pediatric disease that is so brutal, because there's never any closure. Pat Furlong from PPMD used to describe it as, Duchenne is a death by 1,000 cuts. It's never, you get to that stage, okay, here's where we are. We're now going to, we're going to get on. We know where we are. There's never that, because you're always losing, you're always going down, 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 and you're always having to recalibrate physically, mentally, your expectations, your son's expectations, stations. It's devastating. It's really devastating. So if we can try and capture that in a way that we don't have to keep going back to parents. So we've done this caregiver piece of work, and the academic who worked on it, she's quite, we've worked with her for a while, and she keeps emotion out of it. She's very, very professional. She deals in data and evidence, but she was really cut up about listening to the patient experience. And this is someone who's worked in health-related quality of life. And even she hadn't realized, just how bad it is.
Yeah.
So when we say we need to incorporate the patient voice, that's what we need to do. We need to educate from inside. So they don't then have to come and plead for drugs at the very end of the process, because that's wrong.
You said something that really just really hit me, and I want to repeat it for all of our researchers that are listening and doing patient work, which is that patients adapt and cope and speak often about their disease or about their child they're taking care of with language that could be reflective more of the coping rather than the actuality. and that we as researchers probably really need to recognize that. And and I would think that might be even more true in a progressive disease, because if you think back to the stage before, your child was a bit better than he is today because you're in a progressive disease. And so where it was before seems better. And so you describe that prior disease perhaps
Yes.
with slightly more positive terms than you might have when you're actually in the disease or when you're looking forward to that stage that he just was in. So it makes me wonder about the true authenticity of the patient voice and where you're getting that patient at the time. It also makes me wonder if gathering that information in a more group format when you're with other mothers and fathers that are dealing with it, if it might put you in a more true voice than you might be if you're sitting on a committee or you're speaking to an academic and you're trying to use words that you have a shared vocabulary. It's just very complicated, and I think researchers really need to understand that in order for them to do their most authentic work as well.
I think you're so right, Patti. I mean, it was that taking the day to sit around a table to really let it all come out and really be honest about the devastation of being a parent of a child who is dying, and not sugarcoating it and not diminishing it, So next time somebody says, what's it like being a caregiver for someone with Duchenne, I'll say, read that paper. Don't ask me, because I can't tell you today, because today I'm trying to survive.
Right.
Today I'm trying to survive, and I'll go, it's okay. If you really want to know what it's like, read that paper. And don't come asking me again and again and again, because it's not fair.
Yeah. What makes a stakeholder want to work with you or to work with patient advocacy groups in general? What was the thing that made them call you back? Because there's a lot of people knocking on the doors of these regulators and the pharmaceutical companies. What was your special sauce? I mean, was it persistence? Was the fact that you came out of media and you know how to be articulate? I mean, what was it?
There's definitely the ability to articulate an argument and articulate where you want to go. I had some very good trustees right from the beginning who really helped to make us as professional as we could be from the off. But I really think a company we're working with, they said the other day, there's a difference between noise and being informed. And that's true patient advocacy, is being informed and using that to change things. And I think that's what we've done at Duchenne UK. We haven't just made noise. In fact, we don't really make noise.
So give me an example of what noise might be versus
noise might be. So noise might be when Translana was going through NICE all those years ago. I went to a rally organised by another charity. We were standing outside number 10 Downing Street, which is where the Prime Minister lives, chanting and holding banners. And I just stood there thinking, this is ridiculous. This is not going to move the needle. Number one, it's not even number 10 Downing Street who listen. NICE is an independent body. We're not even talking to NICE in a language that they need or understand. This is not going to help. It's a complete waste of my time. I'm not saying that having media exposure on certain issues doesn't help. It may or may not. What really helps is giving the companies what they need to get through NICE quickly. So that's what I mean. The difference between noise and actually informed action. And the other thing is for the hub, for the network of trial sites, when Alex and I set up Duchenne UK, other people would say to us, oh no, you can't fund doctors and nurses. That's the point of the NHS. Well, I could have just said, okay, well, I'm going to launch a big campaign. I'm going to make a lot of noise about this. And in 5 years' time, we still won't have happened. Or I'm just going to fund it myself. And then say to the hospitals, okay, we funded that post. all this money's come in from pharma. Will you then carry on funding that post? And lo and behold, they did that. I mean, in almost every hospital we're funding now, the trust is funding that post that we seed funded because the money's coming in from pharma. So we could have made noise, or we could have made an informed choice and an informed decision to actually do it ourselves and then, you know, move the needle that way. And so that's what we did. And I think because we've got a track record of doing it now, people want to work with us.
Listen. So with this, correct this statement. I'm gonna try to summarize what you said. A patient advocacy organization that may want to work directly with pharma on improving research would be better off trying to understand what pharma's problem is in getting that drug researched and approved, and speaking to them in that language, rather than making noise and raising awareness of the disease per se. That patient advocacy group needs to understand what the hurdles are of the stakeholders.
Yeah.
As opposed to staying solely in their silo, which is a parent or a child or a person suffering from a disease, is that you have to get out of your silo to understand what the challenges are with the other stakeholders if you want to at least begin the conversation. Then once you've got the conversation, your issues can be raised.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you do have a certain amount of currency as a patient organization if you're focused on what you should be focused on, which is treatments that work and that can be, you know, accessed in a flexible way. Yeah, I mean, someone like Pfizer, right? They will know that the challenges ahead. They will know what the challenges are going to be with NICE. A smaller company who's just new to this space and is just focused on getting the treatment proved as safe and effective in their clinical trials may not necessarily know or have the infrastructure to know what's coming or be able to deal with it. And I think that's where Project Hercules has helped. But then it's also helped the big pharma companies because it's, you know, they have learned a lot from listening to the patients and from everything that we have brought to this. You know, they've learned that there's a new transfer stage. They've learned that we've got a new quality of life metric. You know, there's a whole lot of learnings that have come out of this. And that's why I'm so proud of it, is because it's such a sophisticated way of listening to the patients, and really translating that into something meaningful that can help everyone.
Yeah. You took anecdotes and made it into a broader evidence base. Let's keep digging down into what you've learned. So your organization has been in effect for 13 years. You've certainly had a magnificent trajectory in the breadth of your impact. What mistakes did you make, if any, and what did you learn from those? If you sit here at 13 years and you look back and you think, I could have done that more efficiently, differently, I could have gotten that group involved, what would that look like to you when you self-reflect?
The first mistake I made when Eli was diagnosed was thinking that, you know, I was going to be scooped up by this incredible system and everything would fall into place. And that's really the absolute opposite of what happens. And I think in terms of the charity, I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I don't think we did make any mistakes. I mean, I think things move slowly. Sometimes it feels like you're pushing treacle uphill. And, you know, if I could regret anything, it's that things didn't happen soon enough. You know, but I can understand if things don't happen soon enough for scientific reasons. What I cannot live with is if things don't happen quickly enough because of human-made artificial bureaucratic barriers.
Right, 2.5 years in committee.
Yeah.
It's unconscionable. Yeah,
exactly. I think that's all I can give you, Patti. Sorry.
No. You know, I think sometimes you don't want to manufacture something, but you you had the foresight, and what you said is one of the most important things, is that you worked with smart people that had knowledge that you didn't.
Yeah.
And that probably prevented a number of mistakes and certainly speeded up the rate at which you accomplished what you did. So we're sitting here in 2024. What's your short-term goal for the next, let's say, 18 months?
My short-term goal is, we've got some promising treatments coming through the pipeline. My short-term goal is to get them approved and reimbursed, and for patients to get access to them as quickly as is humanly possible. And we're working furiously behind the scenes on a lot of that stuff. I want patients everywhere to have access to the best care that there is currently available. There are a lot of off-label medicines that kids can take, and we want to try and uniform the provision of those in the UK, and other countries can gladly take what we've built and use it where they are. And we're focusing a lot now on the technology revolution and how that has woefully abandoned disabled people. I'm talking about things like powered wheelchairs, and also the lack of any kind of upper mobility assistance devices that can help kids. You know, we've taken people to the moon. Why can't we help a kid lift their arms up without too much trouble using you know, assistive technology? This is an area I feel where kids are being really badly let down. Powered wheelchair market, you know, needs shaking up, and that's our focus. As well,
Are
as
you knocking on the doors of those companies and talking with them with your data?
A lot. We're doing a lot. And then the other thing that we're really keen on is cardiomyopathy is a big problem in Duchenne. It's one of the biggest killers of kids with Duchenne. So we've launched a £1.5 million grant called Help the Heart, and we're hoping to get some trials up and running for cardiac approaches for Duchenne, because that's really critical for you know, mortality.
So let's end with two sets of questions that I always ask everyone that I interview in this series. Is, if we're having this conversation in 10 years, so 2035, what are we going to be talking about?
Oof. Hopefully we're going to be talking about the cocktail of medicines that are available for kids with Duchenne. Hopefully we'll be talking about which gene therapy drug is the most effective and should our boys be taking out of the many that have been approved. And we should hopefully be talking about CRISPR and curative approaches to Duchenne being an actual reality.
And let's do a rapid fire series of questions. Answer these in 1 or 2 or 3 words. Your greatest achievement. My greatest achievement is?
Never taking no for an answer.
Magnificent. My greatest fear is?
My greatest fear is that none of this will happen in time to help my son.
And my greatest wish is?
My greatest wish is to unlock a cure for Duchenne.
Mine too. Is there anything else you want to add to today's conversation, Emily?
I really enjoyed talking to you, Patti, and I think you're such a great interviewer, and I think you covered everything.
Thank you.
It's been a real joy to be here. Thank you so much.
It's been a real honor of mine to speak with you, not only for your accomplishments in this disease state, but with your intentionality and drive and fierceness as a mother.
Something mums are pretty good at, actually. So, yeah.
That's right. We are.